Hey everyone, Jonah Mathis here. I get the same question all the time. Should I get a soundbar or a receiver with separate speakers? And before today, that answer was always, it depends. But usually pushing people towards soundbars for convenience, ease of setup, and a bare minimum decent audio quality. Well, after using one of Sony's newest AV receivers, it really started to change my mind a bit. Let's talk about it. Now, just a heads up, this video is sponsored by Sony and they provided their new STR-AN1000 for me to test and use. I'm not reviewing this receiver, but we are gonna look at some of the new features that it offers. I think it's gonna shift some people's mindsets on soundbars and receivers as a whole. Traditionally, with soundbars, they usually come as a set system that you can't add on to or modify in any way. Sony and a few other brands have come out with what I would call a modular soundbar system, where you can purchase the components individually and separately. For example, Sony has their ST-A1000 soundbar, their SA-SW5 subwoofer, and SA-RS5 surround speakers. These products worked flawlessly together, but can be added or removed at any point in time. That's awesome and exactly what consumers have wanted: flexibility, good audio quality, and convenience. I honestly think what pushes people away from receivers the most is running speaker cables and them being somewhat complex. And trust me, I get it. I used to do it for a living and it can be extremely difficult to do in certain rooms, even for a professional. But in Sony's new receiver lineup, you're able to pair compatible wireless surround speakers and subwoofers to them. So you can use any front channel speakers that you want, then you can pair the RS5 or RS3S surround speakers to the receiver without running speaker cables from the front of the room all the way to the back of the room. That's a big deal for a lot of people, and that's just one of the various new features offered by their new receiver lineup. Before going further, I should probably explain a little bit about Sony's new receivers though. So they announced a total of 5 new receivers this year, 4 under their ES line, which is mostly meant for custom integrators or installers. These are the STR-ZA1000 ES, 3000 ES, 5000 ES, and 7000 ES. We aren't really going to go into these much in this video because again, they are more so meant for custom integrators or advanced and more complex systems. Then there's the one I have right here, which is the STR-AN1000 with a price tag of $899. This is the model I think a lot of you might be interested in. And before you start commenting on the flaws with my setup, I don't even want to hear it. I'm closing on a new home here in a couple of weeks and I'll be moving in about a month. So forgive me for my temporary janky setup. It'll be much better in the near future. Anyways, the AN1000 has loads of improvements from top to bottom. I won't mention them all, but here are some of the major specs that I think most people are going to be interested in. It supports up to 7.2 or 5.2.2 channels of audio. We've got 3 zones. Zones 1 and 2 support audio and video, and Zone 3 supports only audio. It has 6 HDMI inputs and 2 HDMI outputs, 1 out/E ARC port and 1 out/Zone 2 port. And 2 of the HDMI inputs support 8K or 4K at 120 Hz. In total, the receiver can output up to 165 watts per channel, which should be plenty of power for a majority of people. When it comes to video standards and audio codecs, it supports basically all of the leading formats in both verticals. For HDR video, you've got Dolby Vision, HDR10, HLG, and IMAX Enhanced. For audio, of course, you've got Dolby Atmos and DTS:X for 3D object-based audio experiences, 360 spatial sound mapping for optimizing the audio for your room, and Digital Cinema Auto Calibration IX, which automatically corrects the distance, angle, sound pressure, and frequency responses for each and every speaker. Wow, that's a lot and we're still not done yet. For music, it supports high-res audio and 360 reality audio. Then for audio streaming, you can use Bluetooth, Wi-Fi, Chromecast, Spotify Connect, and AirPlay. It comes with a basic remote control that's very similar to the soundbar remote controls, and it can also be controlled through the Sony Music Center app on your phone. Okay, now I'm done with the specs. Let's dive into some of the features that this receiver offers. Some are similar to what Sony's new soundbars have, and some are entirely new. Going back to what I was talking about earlier, yes, you can wirelessly connect the RS5 or RS3S speakers as surrounds. If you use the RS3S as surrounds, they will take over 2 rear channels of audio from the receiver. and the RS5 surrounds will take over 2 rear and 2 height channels, so just keep that in mind. And you can wirelessly connect up to 2 SW3 or 2 SW5 subwoofers to the receiver as well. Something to note here though is that you can't mix and match these, so you can use either 2 SW3 subwoofers or 2 SW5 subwoofers, not one of each. The setup process for this receiver is pretty simple, but does take some time. It's not as simple as most soundbars where you just plug it into power and it's ready to go in a couple of minutes. Of course, you'll have to connect the speakers to the receiver with speaker wire, and do this while it's powered off, of course, like you don't want to damage anything here. For the front channel speakers, I'm using the Klipsch Reference R52C as the center channel and 2 Klipsch Reference R41M bookshelf speakers as the left and right channels. Get your devices connected to the receiver via the HDMI inputs and connect it to your TV or projector via the HDMI out port labeled TV. Because remember, there are 2 HDMI out ports, one for zone 1 and one for zone 2. Power on the receiver and set your TV or projector to the correct input, then press the home button on the receiver's remote control. This takes us to the next feature that I really like about this unit, and that's the GUI or graphical user interface. It's very similar to the GUI on the latest soundbar systems, except it is much more extensive. The GUI allows you to do a lot, like switch video and audio sources, set and modify presets, adjust the different sound effects, control the additional zones, and dive into more detailed settings that the unit has. Now I suggest going through the easy setup process first. This gets the receiver connected to your Wi-Fi network and runs the auto calibration. If you're like me and using wireless surrounds and/or a wireless subwoofer, then you'll need to go to the wireless speaker settings first to get them linked to the receiver. Anyways, the auto calibration is called Digital Cinema Auto Calibration IX and calculates the speaker locations, adjusts the audio levels, and in general optimizes the audio profiles to best fit your room. You'll start out by inputting some room measurements, like the distance from the screen to the listening position height, the ceiling height, and the screen height. I don't think I can emphasize enough how awesome the GUI is, and the information displayed on the screen. It just makes each step in the setup process really easy and manageable. Then you need to connect the included calibration microphone. It even comes with a stand and has you position it in 2 different ways, but again, it's very, very simple. It'll play some sounds out of each speaker, then process that data for a minute. It really surprised me with how close its calculations were for the speakers. You can go back in and adjust the height of the speakers and the distance from the screen to the speakers as well, but for the most part, it was pretty close. And it also adjusts the levels of all channels to make for a more balanced listening experience. Now that's the basic setup process. Yes, there are a lot of other things you can do, but you can tinker and mess with them later on. Realistically, the hardest part of this entire setup process is running the speaker wires. And if you're only wiring the front channels like me, it really is a piece of cake. I think the only part that makes a receiver drastically more difficult to set up than a soundbar is running the speaker wires to the back of the room, and then maybe the setup process depending on the unit, of course. Unless you just run the speaker wires across the floor like a complete and total animal, and you don't hide them, and I know some of you are watching this video right now. That's not okay. You gotta fix that. But it's awesome to see Sony add in this wireless speaker feature that their soundbars have, because it opens up the possibilities for a lot of people that are either, one, scared of running the speaker wire or aren't able to do it, or it's just not feasible for their specific room. I think the main downside with that is that you're limited to only 2 different sets of surround speakers if you choose to go wireless. You can use either the SA-RS3 speakers or the SA-RS5 speakers. I've talked extensively about both of these models in the past, and I'm a huge fan of the RS5s, but I always prefer more flexibility when possible. I'd love to see Sony come up with a wireless amplifier that powers any set of surround speakers that you'd like to use. I know that's a pretty niche product, but I think it's a cool idea and would definitely make Sony stand out further from their competition. There are a few other notable features that I unfortunately wasn't able to try out, but wanted to mention them anyways. Center speaker lift up uses any front height speakers to help lift the center channel of audio to the center of the screen. I wasn't able to try this because I don't have any front height speakers with this specific setup. There's also acoustic center sync, which enhances the center channel of audio by having the speakers in a compatible Sony Bravia TV and the center channel speakers work together at the same time. This receiver and the ES line of Sony receivers also work with Sonos now. You just need to have a Sonos port in order to integrate them. But once it is set up, you can turn on the AV receiver, change the inputs, and adjust volume levels directly from the Sonos app. This is actually really interesting to see. Some AV receivers from other brands offer this works with Sonos feature as well, but don't have a competing multi-room audio solution. But Sony has a multi-room wireless audio solution that's controlled through the Sony Music Center app. So it's cool to see Sony playing ball with Sonos to offer a more convenient solution for some consumers. And by the way, the app gives you quite a bit of control over this system, but doesn't allow you to do everything. Controlling the zones from the app is very helpful for sure. And if you want to make some adjustments to the channel levels, you can do that from the speaker settings inside the app as well. When using the receiver, if you have the device connected to an HDMI input, you have access to quick setting changes without ever leaving what you're watching. And you'll also get a volume indicator on the screen, which is very convenient. If you're watching something through the TV or device connected to one of the TV's HDMI inputs, then you don't get these features, but everything else mostly stays the same. And big asterisk there, by the way. This depends if your TV has HDMI eARC or not, and if the TV has multiple HDMI 2.1 inputs. But we aren't gonna get into that today. That's very complicated. I love that when you begin watching a TV show or movie, the receiver immediately displays what audio format it is utilizing. It's very convenient for me at least. No more guessing if you're actually getting Dolby Atmos, DTS:X, or whatever. I really like the interface when you're listening to music on this receiver as well. If you're wirelessly streaming through any method, you'll get some album art and other information displayed on screen. Music streaming platforms like Tidal, Amazon Music Unlimited, and Deezer support 360 reality audio, which is similar to Dolby Atmos music. This allows music producers to play sounds in a 3D environment, rather than just a simple left and right channel of audio. I actually did a full video on Dolby Atmos music and how that works. This is very similar to Sony 360 reality audio, so go check that video out if you're interested. It's really quite interesting and makes the music listening experience a bit more immersive depending on the song that you're listening to, of course. Again, big thank you to Sony for sponsoring this video. It was really fun to sit down and use this receiver and make this video. If you're interested in the STR-AN1000 or any of the other Sony receivers or products, I'll have links to them in the description down below. You can also watch my reviews of the Sony HT-A7000 soundbar or the HT-A9 sound system, both of which I was extremely impressed with. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.